Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Okay, now let's welcome our main speaker. Who the heck is he? Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan, and I'm an alcoholic. Dan. I want to thank Ramona for asking me to come out here tonight. And just wanted to clear up Ron's story. He said, what he actually said to me was, would you be my temporary sponsor? And I says, what's that? And he didn't know exactly how to answer that. So, I grew up in this area. I'm a local. I was born in Santa Monica Hospital. Didn't stay in, and actually grew up with my grandmother in Venice, and rode her all around this area on a bicycle, and everything was fine for a long time. Can't put too much weight on the fact that I came from a broken home, because I think statistics show that what's normal today is families living with the parents separate, right? So I guess from that aspect, or from that perspective, it was a normal home, right? But what changed for me was I started hanging around this gas station in Culver City, and it was a little hard to get there on a bicycle, so I went out. It was 15 and a half, and I got my learner's permit. Went out and got a little motorcycle, and the thing about this gas station that attracted me was there was a lot of guys hanging around there. It was the Texaco station between I guess Venice and Washington, right on the on-ramp, and there was about 50 guys that hung around there, and this is the late 60s, like 1969, and I got exposed to a whole new life, because what they were doing every day was smoking pot and drinking beer, right? They were much different than all my other friends with their bicycles, right? And that's what I started doing, because see, my mother started dating the guy that owned the gas station, right? And he was trying to get in good with my mother, so he went out and bought me the motorcycle to impress her. I was okay with that, but what was happening is I was going to this gas station, hanging around with all these guys, and they were doing the teenage thing, standing outside the liquor stores waiting for someone to go in and buy us booze, and smoking pot every day. And I never really got too carried away with pot. At first it was kind of interesting, and I liked it, but what had happened was my stepbrother, who also worked at this gas station, my mother and this guy eventually got married, and he was my stepbrother. He came up to me one day and he says, Dan, you're starting sentences and not finishing them. I thought, that's a problem. Right? So I figured it must be that pot, so I just stopped smoking pot altogether. Now, I had pot around my house, right? Except I just never touched it. When I had guys over and everybody was saying, hey, we need to go get some pot, and I'd always say, well, I have some. And they'd say, no, we don't. How old is yours now? Because I had it for years. And that was back in the days when you measured your pot with your fingers. Right? Right? There was a 4-finger lid, and for $10, right? But I was more attracted to drinking beer, and I found out if you mixed a little tequila in with the beer, you didn't have to drink so much beer, right? You know, and I got into that, and I started, naturally, eventually there was no need for the beer, right? Tequila and vodka, and booze was interesting because you could kind of set your mood with it. If there was ladies involved, rum was a good choice, right? If you're going to go out with the guys and just who knows what was going to happen, you wanted to get rowdy, tequila was a really good choice for that. And whiskey was just sort of in between, not sure what's going to happen, and it was dependable. Alcohol was always dependable, and alcohol was part of the whole picture all the way through the whole drug scene in my teenage years. And it was interesting at this gas station. This was around the time when the Vietnam War was going on. Didn't think too much about it, but then again, I didn't think too much about anything else except hanging out, drinking, using drugs. And there were so many guys at this gas station that would kind of just wander through that we got exposed to pretty much anything that was in the area. And I never really got into too much with pills but there was a lot of acid back in those days going through this place. I don't have any stories with like little pieces of paper with spots on them or tablets. We were getting it in baggies on chocolate powder, and that seemed to be the way it always came in with our little group. And so we never, when people talk about how many hits of acid they take, I couldn't really measure it that way because we were just pouring it into sodas and drinking it. Don't remember a lot around all that, but life was good. I was living the way I wanted to live, doing the things I wanted to do. School obviously got a little less important. Besides, at 16, what else are they going to teach me, right? So I'd get up in the morning, jump on my motorcycle. My mother would think I was going to school, and I'd kind of head that direction, but that just happened to also be the direction to the freeway. And every day I'd go to Hamilton High School, right? Now, I was registered at Santa Monica High School, right? But my friends were in Hamilton High School. And I'd honk my horn. I had this distinctive horn, and they'd jump the fence, and we'd just hang out and do whatever kids do. And that, life was good. Like what Bill says, he felt like he was a part of life at last. I had more friends than I'd ever had. I had a lot of dreams for who I was going to be when I grew up. Because my parents, my father was quite successful. My grandfather was successful. And I was sure that one day when I'm ready, I was going to get some success as well, right? And between the acid and the heroin, and then cocaine came into the picture, and a lot of, booze was always a part of it. It left me at a place where eventually I was, when I hit about 25, about 20, I started shooting cocaine, and did that for 10 years. And near the last couple of years of my using, smoking crack and drinking a lot of whiskey. Jack Daniels, I had this crystal Jack Daniels canister that I got, and I kept refilling. And I also got onto their mailing list. I don't know if you knew that Jack Daniels had a mailing list. They're still sending me calendars, right? But they sent me Jack Daniels glasses. They sent me all kinds of things. They registered me for this thing where I supposedly have this lot in Tennessee, a plot, It, you know, it's, and I get letters. I still get letters all the time from him about my lot, saying that first I'll get a letter saying that it needs the brush cleared. Then I'll get another letter saying, "Don't worry, we took care of it for you," right? Which I thought was kind of nice because I developed this relationship with Jack Daniels that that went about the same way as all the rest of my relationships went. Started off real good, and I don't know what happened. Right? Now, I was drinking a lot of whiskey and shooting a lot of cocaine, and if you asked me if I was powerless, that wasn't powerless, because I was living the way I was living. I was living the way I wanted to live and doing all the things I wanted to do and drinking the way I wanted to drink. But there came a time around 1987, beginning of 1987. See, by that time, I had trashed a business that was a factory I had where I had about 20 employees, and when near the end of it, I was taking stuff out of the warehouse by myself near the end because I couldn't afford to even pay anybody to help me to clear it out. I had trashed a marriage. I actually threw her out because I was sure that if she just wouldn't nag so much, that I wouldn't have to drink that as much as I was drinking. She was so nice when I met her. I don't know what happened. I see now, it's like the way I behaved, I drove her crazy. She couldn't continue to live, and she couldn't get away from me. So I think I did her a big favor by throwing her out, right? But, about 1987, though, I looked around my life. I had a lot of dreams. I thought pretty well of myself and who I was going to be one day. But now I'm sitting on my couch, staring at a television that's turned off, knowing that I'm going to drink again, even though I had told myself I'm going to cut back and stop. I had stopped the cocaine because I figured that would take care of it. I'll just drink, but that didn't change the way I was feeling, and that didn't really change my life because still I was drinking every day. And I absolutely didn't understand what had happened to my life. All the dreams that I had for who I was supposed to be or what I was going to make of myself just weren't there. And I made some decisions in the way I was going to live. Right? I was going to stop drinking that way, and I stopped the drugs, but what always happened was I'd be sitting there, basically just hanging on to the pillows. Until finally the thought would be too great. I'd get up and walk to the liquor store, which luckily happened to be right across the street. It was Lad's Liquor. And got some people here that I haven't seen for 30 years. An interesting thing too is that they hung out in a different apartment with some other people, and I was doing my thing, and I was like, I don't think anybody really knew what was going on up there. But I remember walking to the liquor store, talking to myself, talking out loud, like, what's wrong with me? Now, this is back before there was cell phones. Now, if someone's walking down the street talking out loud, you don't think much of it, right? But I was walking all the way to the corner to cross the street, talking out loud, like, I got to stop drinking like this. And I couldn't turn my feet around. And I remember watching the cars go by, looking at the cars, saying to myself, the only way I'm going to stop drinking is to jump out in front of one of these cars. Right? And that place, that alcoholic torture I lived in for 2 years, right? Because I was no longer living the way I wanted to live, drinking the way I wanted to drink. Right? Now I'm telling myself I've got to do something different, and I can't. Right? And it's in that place that I start to experience what they're talking about when they talk about powerlessness. because the powerlessness comes into my life when I'm trying to do something and I continue to fail. And I absolutely could not stop drinking. And, that went on, as I said, for a couple of years. And there was a few attempts that I had made to try to figure out what was wrong, but one of the things that I was sure of is that nobody understood what was going on in my life. I tried to see a therapist, right, $70 an hour, nice guy. Never once told me about Alcoholics Anonymous, though. We'd sit and we'd talk about the thing about my life and my drinking, and he'd ask me to promise I wasn't going to drink until I saw him next time. And I'd say, oh yeah, sure. Usually picking up alcohol on the way home, right? And I found I wasn't even being honest with him. Right? I wouldn't tell him what I was planning to do already while he was talking. And I just got to the place where I just assumed I was crazy. And in that place, from that place, I started to experience some, near the end of that 2 years, that I just assumed that this was not good, not good. I didn't want to live like this anymore, and I had a mind that wanted to die and a body that just wouldn't. And and I got into an argument with somebody, and I felt like probably overly affected by it, and I pulled out a .357 Magnum, and I started to look at it and just think, this is going to solve my problems. This will take care of everything, right? And it was just a flash, just a moment where I thought for a moment that this gun belonged to my brother, and he was actually on the run from unloading a shotgun on somebody. And I thought, and this was like the only person I cared about at this point in my life, and I thought, well, what if they blame him for this? Right? It just gave me a moment to think, and I just looked up, and I didn't believe that there was any God that cared about me, not in the condition that my life was in. But I remember just looking up and saying, help. That's all I said, help. And I never looked at that as a prayer, but looking back, that was probably the closest thing I ever got to a prayer in my whole life. Because there was a surrender that happened at that point, and I honestly knew that I needed help. I absolutely could not do anything about this on my own. And a couple days later, I bumped into one of these friends from the gas station. Didn't even recognize him. His whole face had changed. His name was Brian. And I didn't recognize him because he was a year and a half sober. Just a whole different air about him. And it was funny because I intuitively felt or just knew that I could talk to this guy about what was really going on. And I was more honest with him than what I was with my family. I was more honest with him than what I was with the therapist or with the wife at the time. And he started to talk to me about these meetings that he was going to. And he says that he'd be glad to take me if I'd like to go. Now, the first words that came out of my mouth was, well, no, I don't think I'm that bad yet that I need to go to one of those meetings. Right? But it only took a few more days for me to call him a few more times and ask him more about what's going on over here. And he took me to my first meeting. And, I had spent so much time alone in my apartment, social drinking. Right? At least that was the delusion, right? That it was social. But the truth was it was alone. And now here at this meeting, there's all these people that are talking about sobriety, and after the meeting, about 30 people went out to a coffee shop He took me with, and it was what I got from that. When I got from that was something that I needed more than anything else. And sometimes you can walk into meetings and you don't see this thing, right? Because for someone who has come to the point where they admit that they were 100% hopeless, what they need to see here is some hope, right? And I think if I walked into the type of meeting where it was like unmoderated group therapy, right? I'm not too comfortable with that stuff, and I probably wouldn't have seen any hope for that, right? But that wasn't the case. It was actually some guy who was really entertaining, telling a lot of jokes, and I don't know how much that has to do with recovery either, but it seemed exactly what I needed in the beginning. I needed a hint of hope that there was something different than what I had on my own. And I remember on the drive back with Brian away from the meeting, and I'm saying, I don't know about this spirituality thing and the God thing. Look at where I was. What has God done for me? I lost my business, lost the wife. Look at the sentence to these meetings for life, right? At least that's what Brian said I needed to do. He says, well, try to explain to me that there's a difference between God and religion and spirituality. And I just couldn't see it. Anytime I heard somebody mention God, the back of my hair would raise. Right? But, see, there's a phrase in the book that talks about being faced with alcoholic destruction. See, I read it for a long time before, and I thought the alcoholic destruction that it was talking about was all the stuff I lost. Right? But if you look at where it is in the book, it's like right in around the first step where it talks about what's wrong with me, and that the idea that when I started to drink, that we lose control once we start, and that happens every time we start to drink. And I couldn't understand that. You see, I knew I lost control when I started. I just couldn't wrap my head around on my own before the program. I couldn't understand the idea that I could not start without losing control. Right? But looking back, I see that it happened every time. And that when and it also talked to me about the idea of the obsession, is that when I really had every reason in the world to not drink again, why did I drink again? Over and over and over again. Right? And it explained that as a kind of insanity. A kind of insanity. And I don't mean the kind of insanity that you hear explained in the rooms. What do you hear in the rooms? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. But think about this. As long as you expect different results, you have hope. Right? Come on, now, think about just a couple days before you walked into your first meeting. Did you have any hope that you could do anything different on your own? Probably not. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been here. Right? I was doing the same thing over and over again, knowing that I was screwed. Right? Right? So I come out of the first step, seeing the first step experience for me as being not that I can't drink again, but that if I don't get something more, I will. I will drink again. Right? And that's where it talks about faced with alcoholic destruction, because now it's saying, okay, go on the way you've been going. Or why don't we bring up this spiritual program thing again, right? And from that place, okay, alcoholic death, spiritual way of life. And it's only an alcoholic that'll try to say, okay, let's think about this, right? I didn't think that either one of them was going to be possible for me. Right? I didn't think that God was going to work in my life, and I didn't think that I'd ever stay sober. All right? But early on, I was shown a process to look at this stuff, and it was a process that continually brought me to look deeper and deeper inside myself. Right? Because when I was clear on the idea that this thing was going to kill me, and I look around the room, and the friends that I came in with in the beginning, a lot of them aren't around. A lot of them aren't here. Right? And I think a couple of years ago, AA did a survey. It said 95% of the people don't stay more than 5 years. Yet you also hear in meetings people saying there's as many ways to work this program as there is people in it. But with the statistics like that, that tells me I don't want to be doing what 95% of you are doing. Right? Right? So I had to kind of open my mind up to the idea that maybe there might be something to this spiritual way of life. That there might be a spiritual program that can work for me and move me beyond anywhere that I've been able to take myself. And I found a group in Santa Monica that became my home group. That they seemed like they had something that I wanted. Now, I was told that in the beginning when people told me I needed to find a sponsor. They said, find someone that has what you want. So I would interview them. Okay, what kind of car are you driving? What do you do for a living? What does your girlfriend look like? Who are you hanging with? Right? Because I thought if I straighten up the things around me, outside of me, then I'd be okay. Right? And I went through about 5 of those guys in my first year, right? And ended up with Brian, who brought me into the program, who just sat me down, started taking me through the book one way, and then I hooked up with this home group afterwards with a bunch of people that were, say, I guess you'd call them big book enthusiasts, and and they talked differently, and it attracted me, and I wanted what they had, and I really understood what it meant then, at that point, to really want something, because something had seemed to have changed inside of them, right? They weren't talking about staying powerless. They were talking about accessing power, right? They just talked different, and it's my home group today. It's at 5th and Ocean Park. It's a closed meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's called as outlined in the book meeting. And what had happened there is I went through this process, outlined in the big book, and it changed my life, right? And it brought me to a place where I understood certain things about myself that I absolutely couldn't have understood on my own. And one of the things about this group was when I first started going, I couldn't even talk because you couldn't say anything unless you finished the 9th step at first. But then what had happened is a lot of them started going back through the steps, and then they changed the format to you couldn't talk unless you were in the 9th step. But it was luckily for me, I hadn't got there during that time to the 9th step yet. So they left me alone, because the people that shared there and asked questions, see, crosstalk was allowed at that meeting. It was kind of like full contact AA. If you said something, they would question what you said, and they would and it was supposed to be for clarification, but sometimes it looked more like interrogation, right? Which I don't necessarily right today agree with, but it certainly was interesting as for a newcomer, especially since I was safe because I wasn't in the 9th step yet, and I had to sit there and be quiet. So, but I learned a lot about this process from these guys. And one of the things that they stressed from the very beginning is that the book talks about the idea that we finished all of these amends, right? And I had about 50 harms that came out of my 4th step, right? And I found it really beneficial to be with a group that talked about that and that made that important, because it's so easy to get to that point and to get to the 9th step and start looking at it and analyzing which ones aren't really harms, right? Because fear puts me in a position where I want to try to thin out the list, right? But they were too much on top of it. So, and every time I'd see them, they'd say, "So how's that ninth step coming?" And what I got from that was that the fourth step and the fifth step revealed to me how much I tried to play God in my life, and what the results was. In fact, the fourth step is kind of like a blueprint of Dan running his life on his will. And 6 and 7 showed me through what I wrote in the fourth step, what the difference between defects of character and the nature of my defects. If you look on the first paragraph of the fifth step, it talks about both of those things in the first paragraph. See, the defects of character that it talks about are the things that a lot of people make lists of. But if controlling, I'm arrogant, I'm jealous, whatever you can make a list of, but those are all things that are out here, right? But when you start to look at what do you see as the nature of those defects, you start to look at what drives those in here, and it all came out of the fourth step. And when you write fourth step, whatever way you write fourth step, I think there's a paragraph that kind of guides it, the one on 62, where it says, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our trouble. And I'll see that in the third column, and in the fourth column, how it's driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. Right? If I write any inventory, I've written a lot of different inventories. I had 6 sponsors in my first year, so I had 6 different fourth steps. But my experience was that any one of those inventories that didn't show me the fears that drive the delusion, that result in the thinking that manifest in the actions, I'm never going to see what they're talking about, that I cannot work on those defects on my own. I cannot work on my fears that drive the delusions, that set up the thinking that result in the actions. And that's what I'll see in the fourth column when I look at my fears, self-seeking, selfishness, and dishonesty. And from that place of seeing that I absolutely can't change my life on my own, and then I brought into this place in the seventh step where I draw a line between 6 and 7. 6 is bringing everything I see that I absolutely cannot change on my own, that I find objectionable, and become willing to turn to God for all this stuff from now on. Now I've got 8 and 9 in front of me, and I have to do the same thing. Become willing to bring all of these harms to the point where I'm willing to make them. And there's a line between 8 and 9. 8 is actually much harder to do than 9. Most people get stuck in 8, so full of fear that you can't make your amends, right? And if I'm so full of fear that I can't make amends, then the problem really isn't 8, right? If I don't see that I have to make every single one of those amends, the problem isn't 9 or 8. It's that I've never really honestly believed I need to turn to God with everything from now on, because I don't have the power to do those. If I did, I wouldn't be stifled by fear. And if that's true, the problem really isn't 7. Because if I wasn't willing to really turn to God in the 7th step, then maybe I didn't really see the defects of my character or the nature of those defects. And if that's true, then maybe the 5th step wasn't clear, and the 4th step wasn't clear enough to bring those things out and show me the parts of those that I find objectionable. And if I didn't make an honest and thorough inventory, then maybe the problem wasn't even the 4th step. Maybe it was back to the 3rd step, where that 3rd step decision wasn't honestly and humbly made. Because I still thought self-will would work in most cases. And if that's true, then maybe the problem isn't even the 3rd step. That in the 2nd step, I never really believed that I needed a power greater than myself to restore me to sanity. And if I could get to that point, that in the 2nd step, where I really don't believe I need a power greater than myself to restore me to sanity, then I'm not clear on my insanity that I should have saw in the 1st step, right? And remember, and if you notice in the 9th step, it reminds me at the bottom, it says, remember, in the beginning, you agreed to go to any length for victory over alcohol, right? So in the 9th step, finishing amends becomes completely about whether or not I have a spiritual way of life that will take me to a way of life conducive to staying sober. Right? And then I hear people say, you're never going to finish amends. Right? Now, I came from a group where everybody said they finished amends. Right? And I see it all the time, people that get stuck with that. And let me just say this, that I got to the point where I had my list that I absolutely told myself, and I'm not going to tell anybody about this list over here, and I'm just going to tell them that I'm finished. Right? I was asked to write out my 9th step onto these cards, and I just went through them one by one, and I was told to just do the one that I can do at the time. I'd go through it, and I did every single one like that, and the power just kept coming to do every one. And the Dan that started the 9th step wasn't the Dan that finished the 9th step. I was left with about 5 cards at the end, and those are the ones that I absolutely could not do on my own. And I found that those were the ones that found me sitting in my car with my head on my steering wheel saying, I can't walk up to that door to make this amends. Right? And over again, I saw that where I felt I absolutely had no power, the power came to finish each amends. And they progressively got harder and harder through this last handful of amends. And when I got to the last one, right, I realized that God had accomplished for me what things that I could not do for myself. And I saw the power work in my life. I saw that I had what the people in the book promised. I had access to power. Right? Now, after I finished that, I went a couple months and I started to feel a little like foggy, like kind of, just before you have the flu, you kind of like, nothing's going on, kind of, And I thought I was sick, and I realized, I was listening to somebody else talk about something, and it occurred to me, it triggered a thought that I'm not sick. I'm quiet. That I had been moved to a place that I had never experienced before in my life. I had a quiet mind. I had finished all of my inventory. I had no resentments. I had finished all of my amends, and I had been moved into another place. Right? I had got in touch with this vast inner landscape, which I had never known. Right? And now the trick was to live a way of life that would keep me there. Right? And that's where 10 and 11 and 12 came in. And my practice with 10 and 11 has changed through the years. And there's a lot to be said about that, and I can't do it in 3 minutes. Right? But I had to find what was right for me. But I will say how I differentiate between 10 and 11 is 10 is what I'm doing while I'm interacting with you, and 11 is what I do when I interact with God. Right? And the other thing I will say is that if you look up the definition of meditation, it's only silent if it says silent meditation. That the Christians that were involved in writing the book, meditation to them was contemplative thought. And it talks about in the 11th step, it says we can make some definite, we can give you some definite examples of how to do this. Right? It's not the exact wording, but if you look in the book, it's what it says, basically. And it talks about examining my life when I retire at night. Look at, did I bring God into all of my activities? Right? And my current practice really is about where it talks about the pause as we go through the day. It says as we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action. Constantly saying to ourselves, we're no longer running the show. Right? It talks about thy will be done. Right? That becomes my practice. All through the day I practice asking for that power to work in my life. Right? And at night, the nightly review's about reviewing that practice. You know, and I went through a time where it was about how long can I sit in meditation, and then I realized that the sitting in silence was actually getting away of our common solution, or common what the book says the 11th step is, what we're all supposed to be doing. You know, because some people go towards yoga, some people go towards religion. You know, that's our own spiritual path. But if you look at what the book says, the type of meditation it says is just to bring God into my interactions with everybody around me, right? And I think what it does there is it sets me up to be more effective when people are around me and need help, no matter what the condition of my life is at the time, right? Because ultimately that's the real work in this program, is being in a place where I could help others, right? So again, I want to thank you for listening to me tonight and having me come out here. Thanks.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.